If stories about people who look like they have everything but come home to nothing but silence, and about one small handwritten note that cracks open a billionaire's frozen heart, stay with this one until the very end. And if Damien, Mia, and little Sophie's journey reminds you that the bravest thing we can do is choose love over power, please like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next slow healing story on this channel. The morning of his 39th birthday began like every other morning in Damien Hale's house. Quiet, controlled, cold. Sunlight slipped through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his glass and stone mansion on the hill, turning the polished floors into mirrors. The security system blinked its tiny green approval. The espresso machine hummed, already filled and programmed, and everything was in its place, including the emptiness. Damien walked into the kitchen in a dark t-shirt and gray joggers, still carrying the stiffness of too little sleep. His hair was damp from the shower, his jaw shadowed with stubble he usually never allowed him. On the marble island, someone had already set out his coffee cup. The steam curled up in thin, perfect ribbons. His phone buzzed as it always did. 800, market check with Zurich. 9:30 a.m. Pre-IPO strategy call. 11 Hazirjo Omin, legal review. Nothing on the calendar mentioned his birthday. He liked it that way. Birthdays were for people who believed they deserved cake and candles and wishes. He had stopped believing that a long time ago. He reached for the coffee and saw it. A small rectangle of yellow paper, folded neatly beside the mug. Not his stationery, not embossed. Just a cheap sticky note, the kind you grabbed in a hurry from a desk drawer. His hand hovered. Blue ink curved across it in soft, hesitant handwriting. I don't know what to give a man who has everything. So here's a reminder that you're still human. Happy birthday. No name, no signature, no smiley face. Just that you're still human. The words landed in his chest like a stone thrown into deep water. The kitchen went even quieter. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to fade. No one in this house dared to leave him anything personal. Staff greeted him as Mr. Hale, spoke when spoken to, and never, ever crossed invisible lines. This wasn't a corporate card. It wasn't a branded gift basket. It was a whisper. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. For a moment, he wasn't standing in a mansion. He was 11 again, in a cramped apartment kitchen that smelled like pancake mix and too sweet frosting. His sister Hannah, 3 years older, hair in a messy ponytail, stood on a chair, carefully pushing birthday candles into a lopsided cake made from whatever they had. I know it's not a real cake, she'd said, cheeks dusted with flour, but you're still allowed to be celebrated, dummy. That had been his last real birthday. Before the drunk driver, before the funeral in the cheap church, before the guilt turned every happy birthday into a joke he couldn't bear. Years later, when his first company hit $1 billion valuation, the board had thrown him a surprise party. He'd lasted 8 minutes. After that, he told his assistant to erase his birthday from the calendar. No calls, no cake, no attention. But this yellow scrap of paper on his expensive marble counter, it wasn't asking him to celebrate. It was asking him to feel. He folded the note once, carefully, as if it might tear, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his sweatshirt. Then he turned to the nearest camera. Mark, he said, tapping the intercom, can you pull last night's kitchen feed for me? His head of security sounded puzzled. Everything okay, sir? Just humor me, Damien replied. Timestamp between 11 and 2 a.m. He ended the call. He didn't know if he wanted to know who had done this. He only knew that he needed to. The answer came an hour later, in the dim light of his upstairs office. Damien sat behind the wall of screens that usually showed market data, supply chain graphs, and risk models. Now, one of them played grainy black and white footage of his own kitchen. Midnight. The housekeeper wiping down counters, the night nurse bringing a glass of water, the security guard checking the back door. No yellow note. Fast forward. A small figure appeared in the frame. Blonde ponytail, worn sneakers, oversized cardigan over a simple dress. Mia Lane, the nanny he'd hired 3 weeks ago for his 4-year-old niece. Sophie. She moved quietly and like she was afraid to disturb the appliances. She glanced around once, making sure she was alone. Then she reached into the pocket of her sweater, pulled out a folded yellow square, and set it gently beside the empty coffee cup. Her fingers lingered for half a second. She stepped back, as if surprised by her own boldness. Then she turned off the light and slipped out of frame. Damien froze the video on that moment, her hand hovering over the note, her face soft but determined. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. Mia hadn't written this to impress him. If she had wanted credit, she would have written her name. She had written it as if she believed he would never know it was her. She just wanted him to feel something. He looked down at his hands. The hands that signed deals, moved markets, fired people without blinking. They shook a little. Still human, he whispered. The idea hurt more than it comforted. Mia Lane was easy to miss if you only looked with the eyes he used in boardrooms. Her resume had been short, nanny positions, daycare work, a half-finished degree in early childhood education, no fancy references, no polished LinkedIn summary. He'd almost skipped her interview. Then Sophie had walked into the room, her tiny hand wrapped around his pant leg, eyes wide and watchful. His niece had not spoken a word since the accident. 2 words, if he was honest. The first had been Mama, the last time she saw Hannah alive. The second had been no, when strangers in suits tried to persuade her to smile for pictures at the funeral. Since then, silence. Therapists had tried, specialists had tried. He had tried with gifts and toys and clumsy attempts to play. Nothing. During the interview, Mia had crouched down to Sophie's level without introducing herself. "Hey," she'd said quietly, "I like your dinosaur socks." Sophie had stared at her. Mia hadn't pushed. She'd just stayed there, on her haunches, talking to the socks as if they were shy animals. By the end of the interview, Sophie had edged half an inch closer to her. It was more than she'd given anyone else. Damien had hired Mia on the spot. Since then, he'd seen her in flashes. In the hallway, carrying stacks of picture books and crayons. In the garden, saw, blowing bubbles while Sophie watched from behind a tree. On the nanny cam, lying on the floor beside the little girl, folding bright paper cranes while telling stories in a soft, off-key voice. She never tried to impress him. She never stayed when he walked into a room, the way other people did. She'd just nod politely and slip away, as if his gaze was a spotlight she didn't want. He had appreciated that. Now, watching the frozen frame of her hand leaving a note on his birthday, he realized he'd barely seen her at all. At breakfast, the house felt different, not because of anything visible. Because of the yellow square folded in his pocket. Normally, Damien ate alone at one end of the gleaming dining table. Staff moved in and out like ghosts, refilling coffee, clearing plates. Today, Sophie and Mia were already there when he walked in. Sophie sat on a booster seat, hugging a stuffed fox to her chest. Her blonde hair was tangled in sleepy waves. A plate of pancakes cut into tiny stars sat untouched in front of her. Mia stood beside the table, cutting fruit into precise little cubes, her worn sneakers quiet on the hardwood floor. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said, straightening. "Morning," he replied. He slid into his chair. Normally, he would have opened his tablet and started scrolling through overnight numbers. Instead, he watched. Sophie glanced at him, then looked down quickly, fingers tightening on the fox. "Stars again," Mia said gently, spearing a piece of banana and placing it on Sophie's plate. "What do you think?" "Fox. Too many stars, not enough." She held the fox's nose to the plate, making it sniff exaggeratedly. Sophie's lips twitched. Damien almost missed it. Mia caught it like a magician catching a coin. "Oh," she gasped, hand to her chest. "He says they're perfect. And he also says," she leaned in as if listening, "that he likes having breakfast with company." She didn't look at Damien when she said it, but he felt the words land anyway. He cleared his throat. "Mia," he said. She looked up, eyes wary. "Yes, sir." He almost asked, "Did you leave a note for me?" The question lined itself up on his tongue. Then he imagined her expression if he cornered her about something she hadn't intended him to see. He swallowed it. "Never mind," he said. "Thank you for the breakfast." Her brows lifted just a fraction. "You're welcome," she said softly. He opened his tablet as usual, but his eyes kept drifting to the soil, to the way Sophie slowly, almost shyly, nudged one of the pancake stars toward the stuffed fox. To the way Mia tilted her head to listen to a child who still had no words. You're still human. The note burned warm against his ribs. He didn't mean to spy on them. Not really. Damien told himself he monitored the security feeds because that was what you did when you were responsible for a large property, a valuable child, and too many assets to count. But that afternoon, instead of watching the perimeter cameras, he clicked into the nursery feed. The guest room Hannah had once slept in was now painted a soft blue. A low bookshelf lined one wall, stuffed animals guarding the top, and on the floor, Sophie and Mia sat cross-legged on a blanket. Cranes! They were everywhere. Bright scraps of paper folded into clumsy birds lined the windowsill, clustered around the lamp, perched on a stack of books. Mia held a square of yellow paper in her hands. Okay, she said, smiling. One more for today. Remember corner to corner, like a little mountain. Sophie watched her hands, brow furrowed in intense focus. She reached out and, with small, careful fingers, copied the folds. Not perfect, but close. Look at that, Mia whispered. That's yours. You made that. Sophie cradled the paper crane in her palm. Mia picked up a pencil. Every crane gets a wish, she said. That's the rule. You don't have to say it out loud. You just have to feel it. She turned one of the older cranes over. On one wing, in faint pencil, Damien could make out the words, "Let her laugh again." His throat tightened. He watched as Mia wrote something tiny on the new crane, then placed it gently on the sill. Sophie leaned her head against Mia's arm. The camera's microphone picked up the softest sound, a long, shaky exhale. He realized it was his. He hit mute. He couldn't explain why it hurt to see someone else love his niece so gently, or why it made his chest feel less hollow at the same time. 2 weeks after the yellow note, it happened. Damien was in his upstairs study, staring at a spreadsheet without really seeing it, when a sound floated up through the half-open door. Not a beep, not a phone, not footsteps. A voice? Small, fragile, uncertain. The syllables were barely there. He stood so abruptly, his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. For a second, he wondered if he'd imagined it. Then he heard it again, a little stronger. Mia! He walked down the hallway like he was in a dream, each footstep loud in the quiet. At Sophie's door, he stopped. Mia sat on the carpet in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, hair in a messy bun, a picture book open in her lap. Sophie leaned against her, one small hand resting on Mia's knee. She pointed to an illustration of a girl with yellow hair. Mia's eyes were wet. "Did you say my name, sweetheart?" she whispered. Sophie nodded. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear, but it was a word. The first word she'd spoken in nearly a year. Damien pressed his palm flat against the doorframe, fingers digging into the wood. His heart was hammering. He expected jealousy to flare. He was her uncle, the man who paid for the house, the therapists, the private doctor. If she was going to speak, shouldn't it be to him? Instead, all he felt was relief. Relief that someone, anyone, had reached whatever shuttered place inside Sophie where her voice had gone to hide. Relief that she trusted Mia enough to let a sound out. He stepped back before they could see him. In his pocket, the folded yellow note warmed under his hand. You're still human. Apparently, his heart hadn't gotten the memo that it was supposed to stay frozen. Damien was a man who could find anyone's story if he wanted to. He had done it 1,000 times. Investors, partners, competitors. He'd combed through public records, old news articles, social media posts, and credit histories until people became risk profiles. He'd never done it for his staff. Until now, one quiet afternoon, while Sophie was at speech therapy and the house hummed with the low sounds of vacuuming and distant cartoons, he sat at his desk with a thin manila folder. Maya Lane background summary. He didn't ask him anything illegal. Nothing invasive, just what could be found with some persistent, above-board searching. The file was short, not because she was hiding anything, because she had so little on paper. Mia had lost her mother at 15. No mention of a father. Just a dash and the words not listed on birth certificate. At 17, and she'd become legal guardian to her little brother, Ben. She'd work nights at a grocery store while finishing high school. She'd gotten into community college, studying early childhood education, but never completed the degree. Ben had been accepted to a state university with a partial scholarship. He'd recently withdrawn, reason unpaid tuition. Damien closed the folder. He stared at the wall for a long time. He remembered Hannah, barely older than Mia, stealing extra shifts at the diner so he could have better cleats for soccer. How she'd scolded him for feeling guilty. "You're allowed to be a kid," she'd said. "My job is to make sure you don't forget that." Now, somewhere out there, Bavarmarm, another young woman was sacrificing her life to keep her brother afloat. Working in his house, making paper cranes for his niece, tucking herself into the background because that was what people like him expected. He opened his computer. 15 minutes later, a quiet wire transfer went through from a scholarship fund under the Hale Foundation's umbrella. The next morning, Ben Lane opened his email to find a message from the bursar's office. "Your outstanding tuition balance has been cleared." Damien didn't sign his name anywhere. He didn't want to thank you. He just couldn't stand the idea of someone dropping out of their future because no one with money had bothered to notice. He had underestimated her. He should have known she'd figure it out. 2 days later, Mia knocked on the door of his home office. It was tentative at first, a light rap. When he didn't answer right away, it came again, louder. "Come in," he said, closing a window on his screen. She stepped inside, hands clenched at her sides. She'd changed out of her usual jeans and sweaters into a simple navy dress, but her sneakers were the same soft white canvas, the rubber toe caps scuffed and cracked. Her blue eyes were unusually bright. "It was you," she said without preamble. His brows lifted. "What was the tuition?" she said. "For Ben. He got an email. Then he called me, over and over. We checked and double-checked, and there's no scholarship fund with that name. There's only the Hale Community Initiative. You sit on its board." He could have deflected. He didn't. "Yes," he said. She took a step forward. Why, she demanded. He leaned back in his chair, letting the questions sit between them. "Because he needed help," he said simply, "and I had the means." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for help," she snapped. "No one did." "I know," he replied. She let out a frustrated laugh. "Do you think I'm a charity case?" she asked. "Is this your way of settling a debt because I wrote some stupid note on your birthday?" His chest tightened. "No," he said. "I don't." Then what? She pressed. "Because right now I feel like I've been picked up and moved around on some rich man's chessboard." He flinched. She saw it. Something in her gaze softened, then hardened again. "I wrote that card because you look like you hadn't been told a kind thing in a decade," she said, voice cracking. "I wasn't trying to get anything from you. I didn't want to be seen. I just thought maybe you needed to hear it." He remembered her hand on the kitchen counter in the security footage. The way she'd left the note and walked away. "I know," he said quietly. He paused. "I didn't pay your brother's tuition because of the card," he added. "I did it because I know what it's like to grow up too fast, to lose parents, to have everything feel like it's balanced on your shoulders. My sister, she carried me until she couldn't anymore." He drew a breath. "Her name was Hannah," he said. "When she died, I promised myself I'd never ignore someone who reminded me of her again." Mia blinked hard. For a second, tears stood in her eyes. She looked away. "I don't like feeling like my life can be rearranged without my consent," she whispered. "I hear you," he said. "If you want me to call the school and reverse the payment, I will. No questions asked." Her head snapped back toward him. "You do that?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "if that's what you need to feel okay." She stared at him for a long moment. Then her shoulders slowly dropped. "No," she said finally, "I won't punish Ben for my pride." She turned toward the door. Her hand hovered on the knob. "I wrote the card," she said, almost too quietly to hear, "but not for a thank you, not for a reaction." He met her eyes. "That's why it mattered," he said. She left without another word. When the door clicked shut, Damien realized his hands were shaking. Not from anger, from the unfamiliar weight of being seen and challenged and not walked away from. The call came at 2:02. Not his phone. Footsteps. Panicked. Fast. Wrong. Damien sat at his desk, working his way through line 14 of a contract that would make Hale Capital the largest private equity firm on 2 continents, when the sound of running feet cut through the silence. Then a sharp knock. Mr. Hale. It was Margaret, the housekeeper. Her voice shook. It's Sophie. His heart dropped into his stomach. He was out of his chair before he registered moving. In Sophie's room, the nightlight cast soft shadows on the walls. The little girl lay curled in bed, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her cheeks were flushed an alarming red. Her breath came in quick, ragged bursts. Her fever spiked, the nurse said, struggling to take a temperature as Sophie flailed. We can't get her to calm down. Sophie whimpered, eyes unfocused. When the thermometer touched her, she sobbed and tried to push it away. No, she gasped. No, no, no. Damien knelt by the bed, every polished word and calculated gesture he'd ever used in a boardroom evaporating. Soph, he said, voice breaking. It's me. I'm here. Uncle Damien's here. She didn't seem to hear him. Her gaze slid past him toward the door. She cried. It punched the air out of his lungs. He looked at the nurse. Get her, he said. Now. Moments later, Mia stumbled into the room, barefoot, hair tumbling from its tie. T-shirt twisted, sleep creased her cheek. Her eyes found Sophie instantly. Sweetheart, she breathed. She climbed onto the bed without hesitation, ignoring the nurse's protest, and gathered the burning child onto her lap. I'm here, she whispered, pressing her lips to Sophie's damp hair. I'm here, baby. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. Sophie clung to her, small fingers digging into the fabric of Mia's shirt. The nurse stepped back. Everyone did. The room's center shifted. The medical equipment, the monitors. Even Damien faded toward the edges. There was only Mia and Sophie. Mia held a cool cloth to Sophie's forehead, humming a low, broken lullaby. Her voice shook, but her arms didn't. Damien stood in the doorway, helpless. He had built companies, moved millions with a phone call, talked world leaders into signing contracts. None of that mattered here. His niece's life was hanging by a thread he couldn't see, much less tug. Doctors were called, medication administered, numbers watched. The fever didn't break for hours. Mia never moved. At some point, Damien's legs gave out. He sank to the floor with his back against the wall outside the room, elbows on his knees, hands over his face. He didn't cry. Not exactly, but something hot and sharp sat behind his eyes, refusing to be swallowed. He listened to the murmur of Mia's voice through the cracked door. You're safe, she whispered over and over. I'm right here. Sophie, I'm not leaving. Not ever. Just before dawn, the frantic beep of the thermometer slowed. The fever broke. Sophie's body slackened, limp with sleep against Mia's chest. The nurse stepped in to check vitals. Damien pushed himself to his feet. He stood in the doorway and watched. Mia's hair was tangled, her eyes ringed with fatigue, a damp patch spreading across her shirt where Sophie's tear-streaked face rested. She looked up at him and, for a second, it was just the two of them in a room full of wires and machines and quiet miracles. She's okay, Mia whispered. He swallowed past the tightness in his throat. Because of you, he said. She shook her head. Because her body fought. She replied, I just stayed. He looked at her then, really looked, at the worn sneakers on her feet, at the thin scar on her wrist, at the tenderness in her gaze. A thought slipped out before he could stop it. She's the only one who can reach Sophie's heart, the only one who's reached mine in years. Somewhere between the fever breaking and the sun rising, everything shifted. Damien's life, up until now, had been divided into neat columns. Work, obligation, grief. There had been moments of distraction, fancy galas, brief flings, awards dinners, but nothing had blurred the lines. Now, things overlapped. Breakfasts were no longer silent. Sophie insisted on sitting next to her uncle, babbling in half-words and gestures, showing him her crayon drawings like they were museum pieces. At night, the echo in the hallways was not the click of his shoes, but laughter, high and light. The guest room, once used for visiting executives, was now a nest of paper cranes, picture books, and sock puppets. So Mia was everywhere and nowhere, quiet in the background, but present in every room, and in the way the staff smiled more freely, in the overturned pair of tiny rain boots by the door, in the cookie crumbs on the counter after bedtime. Damien noticed things he hadn't before. How she always took the ugliest mug for herself, leaving the nice ones for guests. How she folded Sophie's clothes with a care that made them look like gifts instead of laundry. How she grew very still when anyone mentioned hospitals. He saw the way his own suit jackets hung in the closet, untouched for days at a time, replaced by sweaters and t-shirts. The firm was preparing for its biggest move yet, a $500 million merger and IPO with an austere Swiss equity group that prided itself on impeccable optics. There were ethics clauses and image consultants and weeks of media training. He played along. On paper, in person, he was making pancakes in dinosaur shapes at 700 im. He didn't see the collision coming. Not really. Not until the photo. It was a single frame, taken from the hedge line at the edge of the Hale property by a photographer with a long lens and no conscience. In it, Damien stood into the front garden in jeans and a sweater, hair ruffled by the wind. He was looking down, smiling slightly. Mia knelt in front of Sophie, tying the little girl's shoelace. Damien's hand rested on Mia's shoulder. Nothing romantic, nothing staged, just a moment. But in the grainy light of tabloid websites, the caption screamed, "Billionaire Hale gets close with help power in the Nanny." The article that followed was worse. It speculated about power dynamics, about blurred lines, about what kind of man slept under the same roof as his domestic staff. By noon, Damien's assistant was in his office, pale. The Swiss board called, she said. They're concerned. The email arrived a few hours later. Mr. Hale, in light of recent media circulation, the Swiss Oversight Committee requests written clarification regarding your relationship with household employee Ms. Mia Lane. Our ethics clause requires that any personal relationships with staff be disclosed and, if deemed compromising to brand integrity, discontinued. We trust you will address this matter promptly in view of the upcoming IPO. He read it twice. For a man who had navigated complex clauses his entire adult life, the implication was simple. Keep the deal. Lose the girl. That evening, the Hale Capital Board met in the glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city. Damien sat at the head of the table. The contract lay in front of him, a pen neatly placed on top. "We understand this is awkward," said one of the older partners, sweat beading at his temple. "But you know how stringent the Swiss are. They're not telling you who you can or can't see. They're just saying it can't be public, it can't be messy, it can't exist," Damien translated. A few of them shifted uncomfortably. "It's a $500 million deal," another said. "Global expansion. Legacy. We've worked too hard to let a personal situation derail this." Personal situation. He thought of Sophie's feverish fingers clutching Mia's shirt, of the cranes lined up like little hopes on the windowsill, of the yellow note in his pocket. "You're still human." He said nothing. Not yet. Mia found out before he could decide how to tell her. Of course she did. The staff had smartphones. The internet existed. She stood in his office doorway again, back straight, hands steady even as her eyes flickered with hurt. "I saw the article," she said, "and the ethics clause, and the commentary." He set his pen down. "I'm sorry," he said. "You shouldn't have had to find out like that." She swallowed. "I heard what the board wants you to do, Ben," she said. "That they want you to clarify." He met her gaze. "It's my mess," he said, "not yours." "I am not a mess," she replied, surprisingly fierce. "I know," he said quickly. "That's not what I meant." She looked away. "I won't be the reason you lose everything," she murmured. "If they need me to disappear for the stock price to stay happy, I will." The words hit him like a slap. "No," he said. She blinked. "I'm not worth 500 million, she said, a sad little smile tugging at her mouth. "I'm just a nanny who folds paper birds and makes soup. You're the reason my niece laughs again," he said. "You're the first person who's told me I'm human in I don't even know how long." Don't ever say just about yourself. Her eyes filled. I don't want to be a scandal, she whispered. I don't want Sophie to grow up thinking she ruined your life, or that I did. He wanted to cross the room, to take her hands, to anchor her like she had anchored them. Instead, he stood very still. I have to make a choice, he said finally. But it's not between you and my career. It's between the person I've been and the person I want to be. She let out a shaky breath. Then, whatever you decide, she said, decide it for you, not for me. I've lived my whole life adjusting myself to fit what other people needed. I can't do that anymore. She turned to go. He heard the crack in her voice, even with her back to him. For what it's worth, she added softly, no one has ever chosen me over money before. So I don't expect you to start. The door clicked shut behind her. He sat down heavily. For the first time in his professional life, the numbers on a contract blurred. The only thing he saw clearly was a sticky note in careful handwriting and the curve of a paper crane's wing. The boardroom was very quiet the next morning. Damien walked in wearing a navy sweater instead of a suit. It was a small rebellion. His lawyer slid the thick stack of documents in front of him. All that's left is your signature, she said. Cameras had been banned from this meeting, but he knew the consequences would still echo in headlines. He read the cover page one more time. Hale Capital, Mirio Group's strategic merger and initial public offering. He picked up the pen. Everything he had built since that tiny kitchen with Hannah's pancake cake was here. All the nights he had stayed late, the friendships he had sacrificed, the funerals he had skipped because markets didn't wait. He thought of his sister's laugh. He thought of Sophie's first words since the accident. He thought of Mia's bare feet on the wood floor in the middle of the night, carrying a feverish child. And he heard, as clearly as if she were in the room, Hannah's voice. The point isn't just to survive, D. It's to be alive when you do it. He set the pen down. I'm not signing, he said. The air went out of the room. What someone choked. This deal is wrong for me, he said calmly. For the company, for the life I want to have. You can't be serious, a partner spluttered. You're going to throw away $500 million because of a nanny. He looked at the man. No, he said. I'm walking away from a deal because it asked me to be less human than I'm finally learning to be. He closed the contract, effective immediately. He added, I'm stepping down as CEO. We'll put a transition plan in place. Hale Capital will be fine. It doesn't need me to breathe. He stood. The room buzzed into frantic motion. But your legacy, my legacy is not a ticker symbol, he said. It's a little girl who laughs again and a woman who reminded me that birthdays still matter. I'm not trading them for a bigger glass office. He walked out before anyone could say another word. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the ground was falling away beneath him. He felt like he might finally be stepping onto solid earth. The Laneside House for Children opened 6 months later in a converted brownstone in Brooklyn. The nameplate beside the door read, The Hannah House, a place for kids who have lost. Inside, the walls were painted warm colors. There were therapy rooms, art rooms, a small garden out back where kids could plant things and watch them grow. Damien funded it, not as a PR move, but as a promise. To Hannah, to Sophie, to every kid who had ever blown out candles on a pancake cake and wished for something more than survival. On opening night, under soft string lights, donors and volunteers clustered around folding chairs. Kids darted between legs, sticky with lemonade. Damien stood off to the side in a simple black shirt and dark jeans, a paper cup of coffee in his hand. Mia stood near the front row with Sophie perched on her hip. They both wore dresses, Mia in deep green, Sophie in yellow and matching white sneakers. His sneakers. He'd bought them 2 weeks ago, replacing her cracked pair without ceremony. The board chair tapped the mic. We'd like to invite the founder, Mr. Damien Hale, to say a few words, she announced. He hated speeches. He walked up anyway. There was no teleprompter, no script. He cleared his throat and looked out at the mix of faces, wealthy donors and worn-out single parents, therapists and teenagers with wary eyes. I spent most of my life trying to control everything, he began. My time, my company, my image. I thought if I could just keep a grip on every detail, the bad things would stop. A faint ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. It doesn't work like that, he said softly. Bad things still happened. I lost people. I lost myself. I became very good at looking like I had everything, while feeling nothing. He caught sight of Mia in the front row. Sophie had her chin on Mia's shoulder, eyes half closed. Then, one morning, Damien continued, someone left a little yellow note next to my coffee. It said, here's a reminder you're still human. He smiled. It was the smallest thing, he said, but it felt like someone had knocked on a door I'd nailed shut. And then a little girl, who hadn't spoken in almost a year, said a name. Not mine, the name of the woman who'd been folding paper cranes by her bed. He swallowed around the thickness in his throat. Those two moments changed everything, he said. They reminded me that the point of having anything money, power, a house on a hill is not to sit alone in it. It's to build places like this. Places where kids who have lost too much can find soft landings. And he nodded toward Mia and Sophie. And they reminded me, he added, that some people are worth more than any deal I could ever sign. He stepped down. Applause swelled around him, but he barely heard it. He walked straight to Mia. She looked up at him, eyes shining. You did good, she whispered. So did you, he replied. Us, Sophie mumbled sleepily. We did us. Damien laughed. A volunteer took the mic for closing remarks. The crowd shifted toward the refreshment table. He reached into his pocket. Mia, he said. She turned back to him. He sank to one knee. For a moment, and her eyes went wide. There's no ring, he said with a half smile. Not yet. I didn't want this to feel fancy. I wanted it to feel like us. He held up a small box. She opened it. Inside lay a pair of new white flats, simple and elegant. You gave me a birthday I'll never forget, he said quietly. You gave Sophie her voice back. You gave this stone house a heartbeat. Let me give you a life where you never walk barefoot again. Tears spilled over. That is the strangest proposal I've ever heard, she said, laughing through it. I can do backup, he said quickly. I can say the old lines. Will you marry me? Will you build this messy, loud, beautiful life with me? Will you keep reminding me I'm human when I forget? She pressed her hand to her mouth. The room had quieted without them noticing. People watched, faces soft. Sophie wriggled out of Mia's arms and climbed onto his knee. Say yes, she whispered loudly, please. Mia's laugh turned into a sob. Yes, she said, of course, yes. The room erupted into cheers. Damien slipped one of the shoes onto her foot, his fingers steady as he tied the laces. This time, when he looked up, the entire world seemed to narrow to her face. He stood, pulled her in, and kissed her like a man who had been walking in a desert and finally found water. Sophie wedged herself between them, wrapping her small arms around both waists. Group hug, she announced. They laughed and let themselves be pulled together. For once, Damien didn't worry about cameras. If the moment went viral, let it. He didn't need to watch the clip to know what it showed. A man who had once chosen glass over people, kneeling in front of the woman who taught him how to feel again. The house they moved into a year later was not as big as the mansion on the hill. It had a front porch with peeling paint, a patch of yard that grew dandelions no matter what you did, and a kitchen with cabinets just slightly off their hinges. It felt perfect. There were no security guards at the gate, no private chef in the kitchen, just morning pancakes that sometimes burned on one side, crayons scattered across the table, and tiny socks disappearing into the washing machine. Every school day, Damien packed Sophie's lunch, fruit cut into crooked stars, peanut butter sandwiches, a folded paper crane on top of each box with tiny words on one wing. You are brave. You are loved. You are enough. Mia worked part-time at the Hannah house, teaching art to kids who talk more easily with colors than words. She came home paint-splattered and tired, eyes bright with work and sorrow. At night, they took turns reading bedtime stories. Damien still read too fast. Sophie corrected him. Mia laughed and shook her head. Sometimes, near the end of the day, Sophie would climb into Mia's lap, lay her head on her chest, and say it softly like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Mom, not Mia, just Mom. The first time she said it, Mia's whole body went still. Damien saw the way her hand flew to her mouth, the way her eyes flooded. She looked at him across the room. He nodded, throat tight. They didn't talk about it that night. They didn't need to. The next morning, it happened again. Mom, Sophie called from the hallway, where are my socks? Maya leaned against the counter for a second, eyes closed, letting the words settle. Later, when she caught Damien watching her, she shrugged with fake casualness. What she said, kids say things. He walked over and kissed her forehead. Some things are worth framing, he said. She smiled. One gray afternoon, rain tapped gently against the kitchen window. The sky was low and soft. Inside, the little house glowed with quiet light. Coffee brewed. There was flour on the counter from a failed attempt at cinnamon rolls that all three of them had laughed over. Sophie sat cross-legged by the window, a box of crayons spread around her like flowers. She hummed to herself as she colored a stick-figure family under a bright pink sun. Mia stood by the table, tying her hair into a messy knot. She reached for her shoes, those same white flats, scuffed now from playgrounds and grocery trips, and one slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Before she could bend, Damien was already there. He knelt in front of her, one knee to the hardwood. He picked up the shoe and slid it onto her foot, his fingers brushing the delicate bones of her ankle. He tied the laces slowly, deliberately. She watched his hands. When he finished, he didn't move away. His voice was low and steady. This time, he said, meeting her eyes, I'm not just promising you shoes. I'm promising you this. The mornings, the burnt pancakes, the hard days, the hospital waiting rooms, the laughter, all of it. And I promise you'll never walk barefoot through any of it alone. Her eyes filled. She cupped his face in her hands. You're getting better at speeches, she whispered. Sophie launched herself at them, pink dress fluttering. Group hug, she yelled. They laughed as she collided into them, their arms tangling around each other, forming a small, imperfect, perfect circle. Later, the three of them sat on the front porch swing, watching the rain make the world shine. Sophie leaned her head on Mia's shoulder. Mia's head rested on Damien's. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything they'd been through, loss and fear and yellow notes and fevered nights and boardrooms and paper cranes, full of every quiet choice that had led them here. This is my favorite place, Sophie murmured, eyes half closed. Damien looked at the two of them, the woman who had reminded him he was still human, the little girl who had taught him how to be alive again. He exhaled, the words coming out almost like a vow. Mine too, he said. This finally feels like home. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, and reminded you that no one is too powerful, too broken, or too late to choose love, please take a second to like this video so more people can find it. And if you want more slow, cinematic, healing stories about second chance, found families, and the quiet courage it takes to stay, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for listening, and until next time, be gentle with the hearts that look the toughest. They might be the ones who need that little yellow note the most.